stepped onto the tarmac of Fort Liberty with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The sun was barely rising, casting an orange glow across the sprawling base, but the magnitude of what lay ahead made her stomach twist into knots. At 19, she had been dreaming of joining the army for years, watching documentaries, reading memoirs, and imagining herself as a soldier who could make a difference. Today, that dream collided with reality. She carried only her duffel bag filled with the basics, yet it felt heavier than ever. Her boots crunched against the gravel as she followed the flow of other recruits, some confident, others silent, all brimming with a mix of anticipation and fear. From the moment she entered the main compound, she felt the weight of scrutiny. Groups of male recruits whispered and glanced her way, smirks tugging at their lips. "Look at her," one of them said, loud enough for the nearby cluster to hear. "Just a recruit, won't last a week." Jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She had expected ridicule. She had expected doubt. What she hadn't expected was the depth of condescension, the way some treated her as if she were invisible or, worse, an annoyance. Drill sergeant, a broad-shouldered man with a voice that could make the air vibrate, emerged from the shadows of the barracks. His eyes swept across the recruits like a hawk scanning the ground for prey. Had been in the army for over 15 years, trained countless soldiers and rarely expressed emotion, yet he had an uncanny ability to spot potential. When his gaze landed on, he did not smirk or scoff. Instead, he simply nodded once and moved on. That single motion, almost imperceptible, became a small ember of hope in his chest. She sensed he would push her hard, perhaps harder than anyone else, but she was ready. The first day of training was a brutal baptism. Recruits were herded into formation, facing the sun with rifles slung awkwardly over their shoulders. Orders barked through the air and struggled to keep pace. Every step, every motion seemed heavier than it should have been. She stumbled slightly during the initial drills, and Miller, one of the tallest recruits, snickered behind her. "Careful, recruit," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Wouldn't want you to fall flat on your face on day one." Laughter rippled through the line. Forced herself to swallow her pride, focusing instead on the rhythm of her breathing and the cadence of the commands. Meals in the mess hall offered no respite. The clatter of trays and the chatter of recruits created a cacophony, but its attention was on observing, learning, and quietly strategizing. She watched how the others interacted, noting who were leaders, who were followers, and who relied too heavily on luck rather than skill. Even in such a mundane environment, she began to analyze, to calculate her position, to identify weaknesses in herself and in others. Yet it was the evenings that became her true testing ground. While most recruits retreated to camaraderie or complaint, stayed behind. She set up makeshift targets and practiced assembling and disassembling her rifle over and over until her hands ached and her fingers bled. Occasionally wandered past, observing silently from a distance, making no comment, giving no guidance, only watching. Took it as approval. She had learned early in life that recognition was often unnecessary. Results spoke louder than words. Her dormitory was a small, Spartan room with metal bunk beds and a faint smell of disinfectant. The other recruits often left their personal feelings at the door but could hear whispers from the neighboring beds. "She'll never last," someone muttered, followed by a soft laugh. Another chimed in, "Yeah, she's weak, just a recruit." The words should have stung but turned them into fuel. Each insult became a reminder that she had to work harder, faster, better. She lay awake at night, calculating the ways she could outshine them, outsmart them, and ultimately prove them wrong. The first obstacle course arrived sooner than she expected. A sprawling, mud-slicked labyrinth of walls, ropes, and swinging beams awaited the recruits. His heart pounded as she approached the starting line, every muscle aching from the morning drills. The whistle blew and chaos erupted. Some recruits sprinted ahead recklessly, falling or slipping, while others hesitated at each obstacle. Moved deliberately, calculating every grip, every foothold. When she reached a particularly high wall, she paused, assessing her angle. A surge of adrenaline gave her the boost she needed, and she scaled it with effort and precision. She fell short of finishing first, but she finished, uninjured and unbroken. observed from the sidelines, nodding her tenacity and quiet efficiency. He had seen recruits give up, cry, or complain, but's determination was different. She did not seek praise. She did not demand attention. She only sought excellence, measured in action. His approval was silent, but it mattered more than any cheer or recognition from her peers. By the end of the first week, had begun to carve a place for herself, though few noticed. She remained the subject of ridicule among the loudest recruits, but whispers of her skill and resolve began to spread quietly. Even Miller and Graham, who mocked her most openly, began to pause before speaking. They did not yet respect her, but an unease had started to grow. Sensed it. She welcomed it. That evening, after another long day of drills, she sat alone in the dimly lit barracks. Her rifle lay beside her, and she reviewed every moment of the day in her mind. She imagined scenarios, ambushes, solo missions, strategic maneuvers, and visualized herself executing them perfectly. The recruits who laughed at her now would not laugh forever. She had no intention of asking for recognition. She would earn it, and when she did, no one would ever call her just a recruit again. Outside, the stars shone over Fort Liberty, indifferent to human struggles, yet felt a strange kinship with the vastness of the sky. Small but capable, overlooked but observant, ridiculed but determined. She closed her eyes and made a silent promise. Every ounce of mockery, every whisper of doubt would become the driving force behind her rise. And when the time came, she would not just prove them wrong, she would leave them speechless. The second week at Fort Liberty arrived with a harsh reality. The Army did not slow for anyone, and it certainly did not coddle recruits who struggled. For it was a crucible. Every morning began before dawn, the chill of the North Carolina air cutting through her uniform as the whistle screamed across the training yard. Recruits were drilled relentlessly. Push-ups, sprinting, rifle assembly, and endurance tests designed to break spirits as much as bodies. Some quit outright, others grumbled incessantly, but kept moving forward, each step fueled by silent defiance. Her classmates' skepticism did not diminish. Miller and Graham made it their mission to belittle her. "Watch her trip over her own feet," Miller snorted during morning drills. "She's going to fall flat on her face again." Laughter erupted among the group, but ignored it. She had grown accustomed to the noise, to the shallow confidence of those who assumed strength was measured in volume rather than skill. Every insult became an invisible weight she used to push herself harder. Drill Sergeant, ever watchful, noticed the dynamic. Unlike the others, he did not laugh or intervene directly. Instead, he challenged her privately, demanding excellence, precision, and unwavering focus. He barked one morning after spotting her lagging during a sprint. "I don't care if you're tired. I don't care if you think you can't do it. I want to see you finish. All of it. Every time." His voice carried both authority and expectation, and responded with a nod, feeling a surge of determination. Unlike the others, he expected results. Late nights became her secret proving ground. When the barracks were silent, would retrieve her rifle and practice. She timed herself assembling and disassembling it until her fingers ached, worked on marksmanship at the small shooting range until her eyesight blurred, and rehearsed tactical movements she had memorized from books and videos. No one saw her, no one cheered her, and that suited her perfectly. Every movement she perfected, every flaw she corrected, was invisible ammunition for the battles that awaited. One evening she stayed long after the other recruits had returned to their bunks. Sweat soaked her uniform, her hands shook from exhaustion, and her muscles screamed. She could have stopped, every fiber of her being begged for rest, but she imagined Miller's smirk, Graham's laughter, and the whispered doubts of her peers. She imagined proving them wrong, turning ridicule into awe. She pushed herself harder until the range echoed only with the clicks of the safety mechanism and the whisper of wind through the trees. Watch from the shadows, a faint nod acknowledging her grit. Physical skill was only one part of the equation. Had begun to observe her peers with quiet scrutiny. She noticed who panicked under pressure, who made decisions impulsively, and who relied solely on brute strength. Even during teamwork exercises, she could anticipate mistakes before they happened, identifying opportunities to correct them if she chose to intervene. She kept these insights to herself, not out of arrogance, but because the Army taught her that patience and timing were more powerful than constant interference. Endurance exercises became tests of willpower. During a simulated 10-mile ruck march, legs burned, lungs gasped for air, and every joint screamed. Miller, expecting her to fall behind, sprinted ahead only to tire quickly, maintained a steady pace, matching her breathing with each step, carefully managing her energy reserves. By the time the march concluded, she had overtaken several peers who had mocked her relentlessly, though she did not gloat. She merely removed her pack and leaned against a tree, quiet satisfaction coursing through her. The drill sergeant's assessments grew increasingly difficult, introduced unpredictable challenges, sudden obstacle courses, surprise marksmanship tests, and mental problem-solving scenarios meant to simulate battlefield conditions. Excelled in each. Unlike the others who relied on sheer physicality, she combined endurance, precision, and critical thinking. Her mind became a weapon as much as her body. Began to use her as an example for certain exercises, showcasing her efficiency, without explaining the countless hours she had invested alone. Yet for all her progress, ridicule persisted. During a hand-to-hand combat drill, she faltered for a moment, and Graham whispered just loudly enough for nearby recruits to hear, "See, just a recruit, can't even handle a simple drill." Laughter followed. Did not react outwardly, but inwardly a storm of determination surged. She refused to allow these comments to dictate her performance. She channeled every insult into focus, every doubt into action. By the time she completed the drill, her movements were precise and controlled, earning a rare nod of approval from. Friendship was scarce, but not non-existent. A few quiet recruits, recognizing her determination, began to approach her for advice. She shared knowledge about marksmanship, movement tactics, and endurance strategies, earning subtle respect from those who had no reason to trust her. Her reputation among the discipline began to grow, even if the loudest voices continued to mock her. The contrast between her quiet competence and the boisterous ineptitude of some peers made her presence increasingly undeniable. By the end of the second week, had begun to feel a subtle transformation. Her body had adapted to physical demands that once seemed impossible. Her mind had sharpened to anticipate mistakes and strategize under pressure, and her spirit had grown resilient, forged in the crucible of mockery, fatigue, and relentless challenge. She began to understand an essential truth. The Army did not care about titles, gender, or age. It cared about results. And results were something she intended to deliver in spades. One night, as she lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, reflected on the progress she had made. She thought of Miller and Graham, of the sneers, the jokes, and the whispers of doubt. She imagined a future moment, one in which those same voices would fall silent, replaced by awe, respect, and perhaps fear. That moment was far off, but she knew the foundation was being laid now, in sweat, pain, and quiet determination. The "just a recruit" label would not last, not if she had anything to do with it. Closed her eyes, visualizing herself in a combat scenario, surrounded by chaos, outnumbered and underestimated. She imagined moving silently, striking efficiently, and turning the tide against impossible odds. Her mind rehearsed each step, each calculation, each precision movement. Every insult she had endured became fuel for this imaginary battlefield. She would not just survive, she would dominate. And when the day came, the recruits who mocked her would remember her name, not as the timid rookie they laughed at, but as the soldier who had shattered every expectation. As sleep finally claimed her, felt a sense of calm determination she had never known. Fort Liberty had already begun shaping her, testing her limits and teaching her the meaning of endurance, strategy, and resilience. The road ahead was still long, filled with trials designed to break her, but she welcomed them. Each challenge was an opportunity, each setback a lesson. And in the shadows, Drill Sergeant watched, knowing that this quiet, relentless recruit was destined for something extraordinary, something no one else could yet see. The third week at Fort Liberty arrived like a storm, bringing with it exercises designed to push recruits beyond what they believed they could endure. had settled into a rhythm, though it was one forged in determination, sweat, and a quiet defiance. She had learned to move with precision, to anticipate mistakes, and to endure physical pain without complaint. But the army had new tests waiting for her, tests that would challenge her mental fortitude as much as her body. It began with a night ruck march. The sky was a dark velvet, scattered with stars that offered little guidance across the rugged training terrain. Recruits groaned under the weight of their packs, muscles screaming, lungs heaving, and spirits faltering. Miller snickered from the front of the line, sneering as she struggled to maintain pace. "You'll be crawling in the mud before we even hit the halfway mark," he whispered, loud enough for a few others to chuckle. Didn't reply. She had learned that words were useless in battle and even less effective against ridicule. She focused on each step, matching her breathing with the rhythm of her legs. The march stretched on for hours, every incline and decline testing their endurance. Recruits dropped behind, stumbling and cursing. Some were forced to turn back, exhausted beyond recovery. Legs burned, her back ached, but she continued. She reminded herself that finishing, no matter how slowly, was a victory. Her silent perseverance gradually drew attention. Some of the other recruits, once mocking, began to notice her unrelenting focus. Even Miller paused once to glance over his shoulder, catching her steady pace as she those who had laughed at her moments earlier. When the march finally concluded, had finished not first, but whole and unbroken, while several others were either pulled from the course or visibly exhausted. She allowed herself a quiet nod, recognizing the small victory. Though her peers remained skeptical, some began to whisper amongst themselves, curiosity replacing mockery. Who had been observing from the sidelines simply noted her performance, the faintest hint of approval in his eyes. The following day brought hand-to-hand combat drills, where recruits practiced defensive maneuvers, holds, and strikes under supervision. Had always been physically capable, but she was untrained in close combat. She struggled initially, fumbling with moves that required precision and timing. Graham, ever eager to mock, jabbed his elbow into her side during a practice sparring session. "This is why you're just a recruit," he jeered. Cheeks burned with a mixture of pain and indignation. She refused to retaliate violently. Instead, she observed, adapted, and corrected herself. Within minutes, she had anticipated Graham's next moves and countered them with calculated precision. Her instructor, watching from the sidelines, raised an eyebrow in approval. By the time the week's drills concluded, had begun earning silent respect. The loudest voices of ridicule were gradually drowned out by whispers of recognition. She helped a fellow recruit struggling with marksmanship, showing him how to steady his aim without drawing attention to herself. She quietly studied her surroundings during exercises, noting patterns and vulnerabilities in her teammates' approaches. Unlike others, she didn't seek praise, she only sought mastery. Yet the challenges escalated. Introduced complex tactical exercises meant to simulate battlefield chaos. Recruits were given incomplete information and forced to make critical decisions under pressure. Excelled. Where others panicked, she remained calm. Where others relied on instinct alone, she analyzed and predicted outcomes. She began to notice the smallest details: a misplaced weapon, a shift in posture, a flicker of hesitation. These details would later become her greatest advantage. One particular exercise tested recruits' ability to navigate a mock urban environment. Squad had to locate hostages and neutralize hostiles while maintaining communication. Most recruits relied on loud commands and brute force, drawing attention to themselves. However, moved silently, scanning for the slightest clues of danger. She successfully located her targets, communicated concisely over the radio, and avoided detection. When the exercise ended, debriefed the squad, highlighting several key failures and praising sufficient approach, a rare public acknowledgement. Miller and Graham, standing nearby, were visibly uncomfortable. They had underestimated her intelligence and ability to adapt. Beyond physical training, mental endurance became just as critical. Spent hours reviewing maps, memorizing terrain, and analyzing potential tactical scenarios. She drew upon knowledge from military manuals, strategy guides, and personal observation. By combining theory with practice, she gained an edge that few of her peers had even considered. It was this quiet, methodical preparation that began to set her apart. The emotional weight of her journey also began to manifest. Despite the physical strain, she found moments of reflection in the early morning quiet before drills began. She thought of her family, of the sacrifices that had brought her here, and of the promise she had made to herself, to prove that strength was measured in resilience, not arrogance. These moments of introspection fueled her determination, reminding her that the army was more than a test of muscle, it was a test of character. By the end of the third week had transformed. The recruit who had stumbled during initial drills was now steady, observant, and resilient. The whispers of "just a recruit" had not entirely disappeared, but they had begun to fade in the presence of tangible results. Recognized her potential quietly, watching as she led small initiatives in exercises without seeking recognition. Even Miller and Graham, though unwilling to admit it, began to regard her with a mixture of caution and grudging respect. Her quiet victories did not go unnoticed among a few of the other recruits either. Those who had observed her late-night training, her strategic thinking, and her relentless focus began seeking advice, subtly acknowledging her growing influence. Offered guidance without condescension, earning respect not through words, but through competence and consistency. She became an example of how determination, intelligence, and discipline could surpass raw strength or bravado. The third week ended with a team simulation that tested every skill had cultivated: endurance, combat awareness, marksmanship, and tactical strategy. The scenario was complex, designed to push recruits to their breaking points. When chaos erupted in the field, many recruits panicked, their training crumbling under pressure. However, remained calm, assessing the situation, anticipating the moves of both her teammates and the enemy, and quietly guiding her team toward success. It was the first time her peers began to realize that she was not simply keeping pace. She was leading by example, without ever raising her voice. That night, as she lay in her bunk, muscles aching and body exhausted, reflected on the week's events. She recognized how far she had come, not just physically but mentally. Every insult, every doubt, every whispered mockery had been transformed into fuel, driving her forward. She understood now that the army was not about fitting into expectations but about exceeding them. She had begun to carve a reputation, quiet, unnoticed, yet undeniable. Closed her eyes, visualizing the future. She imagined herself in scenarios where stealth, strategy, and courage would be tested. She imagined the moment when the label "just a recruit" would be replaced by respect earned through action. That day was not here yet, but it was coming. Every grueling drill, every long night of training, every ounce of effort she invested was preparing her for it. And she would be ready. For the first time, felt a quiet confidence that she had never experienced before. Fort Liberty had begun to shape her, to teach her that excellence was not given, it was earned. And though the loudest voices of ridicule still existed, she had learned a crucial lesson. The opinions of others were irrelevant in the face of self-discipline, preparation, and unwavering determination. The next phase of training loomed ahead, and with it, challenges that would test not just her strength or skill, but her ability to rise above every expectation. Was ready. By the fourth week at Fort Liberty, had earned a reputation of quiet competence. Her peers still muttered under their breath, some out of skepticism, others out of grudging respect, but the drill sergeant's subtle nods and occasional private advice confirmed that she was no longer just another recruit. Yet nothing had truly tested her resolve until the field exercise arrived. The battalion was deployed to a sprawling, rugged training area miles away from the main base, designed to simulate real combat conditions. The terrain was unforgiving: dense woodland, jagged hills, and muddy streams that cut across the landscape. The recruits were tasked with capturing a mock enemy outpost, coordinating movements, communicating effectively, and neutralizing targets, all under strict time constraints. Addressed the unit before deployment, his voice firm. This exercise will test everything you've learned. Mistakes will have consequences. Stay alert, stay sharp, and remember the enemy is unpredictable. Recruits nodded, a mixture of excitement and nervousness evident in their expressions. Felt her pulse quicken not with fear but with anticipation. This was her chance to demonstrate everything she had learned. Yet despite her readiness, she was again underestimated. Her squad was positioned at the rear, officially designated as observers, a role she interpreted as dismissal. Miller grinned as he glanced back at her. "Enjoy watching us handle the real work, recruit," he sneered. Didn't reply. She had learned that patience could be more powerful than words. The exercise began with controlled chaos. Radios crackled with static, and orders were shouted over the din of simulated gunfire. Squad moved cautiously, navigating the terrain, while the enemy, a team of seasoned instructors and advanced recruits, launched an ambush that none of them anticipated. The mock enemy squad was highly disciplined, moving strategically to disrupt their advance. Spears faltered immediately, confusion spreading as commands clashed, and fear began to creep into their movements. Froze for a moment, assessing the situation. While her squad scrambled, she noticed the enemy's formation, their predictable paths, and the mistakes they made despite their discipline. She realized the ambush had created an opportunity, one that could turn the tide if handled carefully. Drawing upon weeks of preparation, she moved silently into cover, blending with shadows and underbrush, eyes scanning every movement. She became the silent observer, calculating, planning, and preparing to act. Her first move was subtle but effective. Using the terrain, she disarmed two instructors by maneuvering them into a narrow path where their weapons were limited in motion. The instructors had underestimated her, assuming she would remain passive. They did not notice her approach until it was too late. By the time she disengaged, the first two threats were neutralized and she had gained confidence. Her pulse raced, not with fear but with controlled adrenaline. She was in her element. Meanwhile, back at the rear, Miller and Graham assumed had been captured first. Their casual laughter over the radio quickly gave way to panic as their own squad became disoriented. Calm precision contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding her. She noticed every flinch, every hesitation, and every opportunity. With each calculated movement, she gained control over the situation, not through brute force, but through strategy. Her late-night practices, her careful observation, and her growing intuition were finally paying off in a way no one had expected. Its next target was the enemy squad's central communication point, a ridge where the lead instructor, acting as the commanding officer, coordinated the ambush. She crept forward, moving over slick mud, fallen branches, and uneven rocks, every step measured. The surrounding noise of shouting and simulated gunfire masked her approach. She observed the enemy carefully, noting weaknesses in their formation and exploiting them with precision. Within moments, she neutralized the lead instructor with a flawless tactical maneuver, throwing the remaining enemy members into confusion. One by one began to incapacitate the remaining squad members. Her actions were swift, calculated, and silent. Each move demonstrated not only physical skill but mental acuity, anticipating their reactions before they occurred. Her peers remained oblivious, trapped in chaos, while turned the ambush into a controlled operation. She moved from shadow to shadow, observing, striking, and disengaging without being seen. The mock enemy, who had been confident in their superiority, now scrambled in disarray, unsure of how such a young recruit could dominate the field. Amid the tension, a single thought occupied his mind: precision over panic. Every instinct she had honed in weeks of grueling training came into play. She manipulated the environment, used natural cover, and leveraged the enemy's mistakes. By the time her squad realized what was happening, the ambush had been neutralized, the ridge secured, and the enemy squad disarmed. Miller and Graham stared in disbelief, unable to comprehend what had just transpired. Their assumption that she was incapable had been shattered completely. Observed from a distance, his face unreadable but his eyes betrayed a flicker of pride. He had trained countless soldiers, yet few had demonstrated such adaptability, patience, and tactical intelligence under pressure. had turned an exercise designed to test the unit into a personal demonstration of skill, endurance, and strategy. Every element of her training, physical, mental, and emotional, had coalesced in this single moment. She was no longer just a recruit. She was a force to be reckoned with. The aftermath was quiet, almost surreal. Her squad arrived at the ridge to find standing over the disabled enemy markers. Miller and Graham were pale, mouths open, speechless. The rest of the unit gathered around, their expressions a mix of awe and confusion. For the first time, whispers replaced laughter. Silent determination had earned not only their attention but their respect. That evening, the debriefing highlighted her performance. Remained stoic but noted the exceptional display. He did not offer overt praise, but his acknowledgement was clear to those who understood the Army's ways. Had not only survived the ambush, she had dominated it. The mock enemy had been disciplined, trained, and experienced, yet she had overcome them with strategy, patience, and courage. As night fell and returned to the barracks, she felt the weight of what she had accomplished. The label "just a recruit" no longer held power over her. She had proven to herself and to others that intelligence, preparation, and determination could surpass raw strength or arrogance. Every insult, every doubt, every whisper of ridicule had fueled her journey to this moment. The battlefield had become her proving ground, and she had excelled. In the quiet of the barracks, she allowed herself a small smile. The journey was far from over. The Army would continue to challenge her, and real combat would be infinitely more demanding than any training exercise. But for the first time, she felt truly capable. She had earned silent respect, not through words or boasting, but through action. And as sleeper that night, she visualized the next challenge, knowing that when it came, she would meet it head-on, ready, prepared, and unstoppable. The morning after the ambush exercise, the recruits gathered for a debrief, their eyes still wide with disbelief over performance. Spoke with his usual calm authority, outlining the lessons learned and the errors that had cost other recruits dearly. Miller and Graham were subdued, the smugness drained from their faces, replaced by reluctant respect. However, remained silent, listening, analyzing, and observing. She knew that respect was earned in moments of action, not in words, and that more challenges were coming, challenges designed to push them to the brink of their endurance. Later that day, a new exercise was announced, a solo reconnaissance and neutralization simulation. The recruits would be sent into a dense, forested training ground and assigned targets to neutralize while avoiding detection. Squad was split into pairs, but an unexpected twist placed her alone in a large sector, tasked with gathering intel and eliminating enemy markers. Most recruits panicked at the idea of operating solo. Miller smirked, believing this was another opportunity to prove she was weak. "You'll get lost before sunset," he muttered, not bothering to hide his derision, merely nodded. Words were irrelevant, results mattered. As she moved into the wooded area, the sounds of the base faded behind her, replaced by the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of birds, and the faint sounds of simulated combat. Every instinct honed over the past month came alive. She crouched low, using underbrush for cover, eyes scanning constantly for movement. The enemy squad was highly trained for this exercise, moving unpredictably, attempting to locate and neutralize her. However, had already identified patterns in their patrols: a slight hesitation at a fallen log, a tendency to follow the same path repeatedly, small cues that betrayed their discipline. Her first target came into view: two enemy instructors patrolling a narrow path. They were disciplined, but their formation forced them to pass through a choke point. Moved silently, carefully placing her body low, her boots pressing softly against the forest floor. Timing was everything. She reached the optimal position, controlled her breathing, and executed a maneuver she had practiced in countless late-night sessions. Within moments, the two enemies were disarmed and tagged as neutralized, before they even realized her presence. Confidence surged, but knew there was no room for arrogance. The forest was alive with potential threats. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves could signal detection. She pressed forward, moving with deliberate patience, her mind racing with calculations. Where would they patrol next? How could she use terrain to her advantage? Her eyes scanned the undergrowth, noting every natural cover, every branch that could hide her movements. By blending observation, patience, and precision, she created a situation where she controlled the battlefield, even as she remained alone and unseen. Meanwhile, back at the base, Miller and Graham's overconfidence began to waver. They had assumed would falter under the stress of isolation, that the just a recruit label still applied. As the radio reports came in, it became evident she was completing objectives faster, with greater accuracy, and without drawing attention. The smug expressions on their faces faded as they realized they had miscalculated her abilities. Competence had shifted the perception of her peers, but she paid no attention. She was focused entirely on the task at hand, completing the mission flawlessly. The second enemy target was a larger group, stationed near a small clearing. Studied their movement, noting their coordination and blind spots. Rather than engage recklessly, she waited, calculating the timing for a silent approach. She used natural cover, a fallen tree, a clump of ferns, the shadow cast by a steep embankment, to close the distance without detection. With steady hands and controlled breathing, she neutralized each member individually, her movements deliberate, precise, and unobserved. Each successful maneuver increased her confidence, reinforcing the idea that strategy and patience were superior to impulsive aggression. Fatigue began to creep in. The sun climbed higher, burning down through the trees, and her muscles ached from hours of crouching, moving, and maintaining heightened alertness. But fatigue was manageable when focus was sharp. Reminded herself of the countless nights she had spent training alone, perfecting movements and anticipating scenarios. She had prepared for this exact moment. The physical strain was secondary to the clarity of mind and precision of action she had developed through relentless practice. Her final challenge lay ahead, the enemy squad's central command post, a ridge where the lead instructor coordinated operations. Analysis revealed a weakness in their perimeter, a single unguarded path, overgrown with brush, that led directly to their position. Every step had to be measured. One misstep could expose her to detection. She advanced, carefully stepping over roots and fallen branches, using shadows to obscure her silhouette. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained calm. Adrenaline sharpened her senses rather than clouded them. When she reached the ridge, she observed the lead instructor through a break in the foliage. Timing was critical. She executed a precise move, neutralizing the lead instructor and causing immediate confusion among the remaining enemy forces. One by one, she disabled the rest of the squad, her actions methodical, efficient, and unobserved. By the time her peers realized the extent of her progress, the mission was effectively complete. She had turned isolation into an advantage, using stealth, observation, and tactical skill to dominate the field alone. Returning to the rendezvous point was met with stunned silence. Miller and Graham's faces betrayed disbelief. They had expected her to fail, to falter, to require rescue. Instead, she stood unscathed, confident, and victorious. Approached, his expression neutral but his eyes betraying pride. "Not bad for just a recruit," he said quietly. It was a rare acknowledgement, but one that spoke volumes. His reputation had transformed. The whispers of ridicule had been replaced by awe, respect, and cautious admiration. That evening, as the recruits debriefed, reflected on her journey, the exercise had tested not only her physical skill but her ability to adapt, to remain calm under pressure, and to use intelligence as a weapon. Every insult she had endured, every sneer from her peers, had fueled her determination. She had faced isolation and outnumbered enemies and emerged triumphant. The label "just a recruit" had lost all meaning. In the quiet of her bunk, allowed herself a brief smile. The field exercise had proven one truth. She was capable of far more than anyone had anticipated, including herself. Yet she knew the path ahead would only grow more challenging. Real-life scenarios would demand even greater resilience, courage, and ingenuity. But for the first time, she felt invincible, not through arrogance, but through preparation, strategy, and unwavering focus. That night lay awake, visualizing the next mission, knowing it would be more complex, more dangerous, and more demanding. She welcomed it. The solitude, the skepticism, and the obstacles had shaped her into a force that could not be ignored. And when the time came for real combat, she would not just survive, she would dominate, earning every ounce of respect she had long been. The field training had been grueling, and had already demonstrated an uncanny ability to thrive where others faltered. But the challenges were far from over. Always deliberate in his methods, knew that's potential had only been hinted at. For this exercise, she would face a scenario designed to test not only her physical and mental limits, but also her tactical genius. A mock mission against a fully coordinated enemy squad, twice her number, with minimal support from her team. The sun rose over Fort Liberty's rugged training ground, casting long shadows across the dense forest. Crouched behind a moss-covered rock, surveying the terrain ahead. The enemy squad's formation was sophisticated, a tight-knit unit trained to anticipate movements, communicate effectively, and maintain discipline under pressure. Most recruits would have frozen in the face of such odds. However, saw opportunity. Every pattern had a flaw, every routine a weakness. She had learned to observe, to anticipate, and to strike with calculated precision. Her first objective was reconnaissance. Using the cover of early morning mist, she moved silently between trees, her boots pressing softly into damp soil. She noted the enemy's positions, the rhythm of their patrols, and the blind spots in their formation. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, and deliberate, minimizing noise and maximizing advantage. The forest, which others might see as an obstacle, became her ally, offering concealment, vantage points, and paths for maneuvering. The initial engagement was subtle. Struck first, neutralizing a forward scout with swift precision. The scout had been disciplined, alert, and trained, yet underestimated the recruit they had mocked endlessly. Within seconds, she had taken control of the immediate area. One by one, she engaged remaining scouts and isolated units, using stealth and agility to avoid direct confrontation with the larger group. Every strike was calculated, leaving minimal traces, maximizing confusion and creating openings for further action. Fatigue threatened to slow her, but relied on mental clarity and focus rather than brute force. Her past weeks of relentless training, early mornings, late nights, repetitive drills, coalesced into instinctive efficiency. She observed the enemy's patterns, predicting movements before they occurred, and striking in moments where they least expected it. The forest echoed with muffled thuds and subtle signs of incapacitation. Yet the main enemy squad remained unaware of the silent force, systematically dismantling their formation. Its next target was the enemy leader, stationed on a ridge commanding the squad. She studied the approach carefully, identifying cover and the timing of patrols. Using a combination of stealth and tactical precision, she moved closer, controlling her breathing and steadying her aim. Within moments, the leader was neutralized, creating disarray and confusion among the remaining enemies. Their previously disciplined coordination faltered, and panic replaced confidence. Had turned what seemed like a hopeless situation into a battlefield she controlled. Back at the rendezvous point, her squad observed through monitoring devices, unaware that had infiltrated the enemy's core position alone. Miller and Graham, still recovering from previous misjudgments, were wide-eyed as reports indicated enemy units were being disabled systematically. Its precision had shifted the balance entirely. Her team's morale surged, while the enemy's effectiveness declined, showcasing her ability to manipulate the battlefield even without direct support. The final stage of the mission required to neutralize the remaining squad members while maintaining stealth. She approached each opponent individually, using shadows, terrain, and her understanding of human behavior to anticipate reactions. No movements were wasted, no mistakes tolerated. Every action demonstrated not only physical skill but cognitive mastery of strategy. The enemy squad, once confident, now struggled to regroup, unaware that the so-called just a recruit had become the dominant force in the engagement. Mind raced with tactical calculations. She considered escape routes, potential traps, and opportunities for misdirection. By isolating threats and exploiting terrain advantages, she minimized risk while maximizing efficiency. Each incapacitation reinforced her understanding of strategy under pressure. Patience and observation were more potent than reckless aggression. The field had become her arena, and she was in complete control. Finally, the last enemy member fell, disarmed and incapacitated. Surveyed the area, her chest heaving, sweat dripping from her brow. The once formidable squad lay neutralized, not through sheer numbers, but through intelligence, precision, and timing. Her solo victory demonstrated not only skill but the culmination of weeks of preparation, observation, and resilience. She had turned chaos into order, uncertainty into control, and skepticism into undeniable proof of her capabilities. When her squad arrived at the site, the silence was palpable. Miller and Graham's faces reflected disbelief, their previous arrogance replaced by awe. Approached, his expression calm but his eyes betraying a rare pride. "Outstanding work," he said, his tone carrying weight without excess. "You executed a complex scenario flawlessly. You anticipated, adapted, and overcame, all without direct support. Not many recruits could achieve this." The debrief reinforced her accomplishment, highlighted her ability to combine observation, stealth, tactical intelligence, and mental resilience. He explained how she had transformed an exercise meant to challenge a squad into a demonstration of individual mastery. Remained quiet, allowing the recognition to settle without fanfare. Her peers, some still hesitant, began to see her not as a timid recruit, but as an exemplary soldier capable of extraordinary feats. That evening, as sat alone in the barracks, she reflected on the day's events. The exercise had been designed to overwhelm her, to expose vulnerabilities and to push her limits. Instead, it had showcased the strength she had been cultivating in silence: discipline, strategic thinking, patience, and courage. Every insult, every doubted ability, every whispered sneer from her peers had been transformed into motivation, driving her to achieve something remarkable. Her mind replayed the entire scenario. The initial observation, the timing of movements, the calculated strikes, the anticipation of the enemy's responses. Every detail reinforced the principle she had learned through training. The battlefield favored those who were prepared, observant, and patient. Strength alone could not achieve victory. Strategy, focus, and adaptability were the true instruments of success. Victory was more than physical, it was symbolic. She had turned the "just a recruit" label on its head. Peers who had mocked her were forced to confront the reality of her skill, courage, and intelligence. Its acknowledgement, subtle as it was, marked her emergence as a soldier capable of independent action, tactical brilliance, and leadership through example. As she prepared for sleep, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. Her journey was far from over. Real-world scenarios would test her in ways the training ground could not fully replicate. Yet she had proven, first to herself and then to others, that preparation, intelligence, and determination could overcome overwhelming odds. She felt a quiet confidence, a sense of readiness that went beyond physical capability. She had learned that victory was as much about mental discipline as it was about action. That night closed her eyes, visualizing future missions, real challenges, and moments where she would face adversity alone. She knew she would be tested again, perhaps under more dangerous, unpredictable conditions. But the fourth week's exercise had cemented a fundamental truth. She was capable of extraordinary feats, and those who underestimated her had done so at their own peril. The days following the solo tactical exercise were unlike any had experienced at Fort Liberty. Normally, recruits' successes were met with casual acknowledgement and fleeting comments, but her performance had left an impression impossible to ignore. Whispers of her actions, the precision, the strategic intelligence, the calm under pressure, rippled through the ranks. Even those who had once mocked her, including Miller and Graham, now observed her cautiously, unsure how to react. Paid no attention to the gossip. Her focus remained on preparation and refinement. Recognition, she knew, came from results, not rumor. The drill sergeant who had observed her from the beginning decided it was time to address the unit formally. The squad gathered in formation in the early morning chill, the mist rising from the training grounds, casting long, ethereal shadows across the gravel. Stood silently in the rear, her posture rigid, her gaze forward. His voice cut through the crisp air with authority, commanding attention without a single shout. Attention! Today, I recognize a recruit whose actions exemplify every value this unit holds. Discipline, intelligence, courage, and persistence, he began. His eyes swept across the group, finally settling on. Has not only completed every task assigned to her, but has exceeded expectations in situations designed to test your limits. She has demonstrated the ability to think, act, and lead, even when isolated, outnumbered, and under extreme pressure. The murmurs among the recruits grew louder. Peers who had spent weeks underestimating her were forced to confront the reality of her capabilities. Miller's jaw tightened, Graham's eyes narrowed, and several others glanced at her with a mixture of disbelief and awe. For the moment was surreal but not unexpected. She had not trained for recognition, she had trained for mastery, and mastery had now earned respect. Continued, detailing her accomplishments during the ambush exercises, the solo reconnaissance mission, and her tactical dominance against a larger enemy squad. He emphasized her calm decision-making, her patience under duress, and her ability to anticipate the actions of others. She has taken what many see as weaknesses and turned them into strengths. Let this serve as a lesson to all. Success is earned through preparation, observation, and relentless focus, not arrogance or volume. The unit stood in silence, the weight of words sinking in. Peers, previously dismissive, now viewed her as a model of competence and resilience. The label "just a recruit" was no longer whispered in mockery. It was replaced with grudging admiration and cautious respect. Absorb the moment quietly, understanding the significance of her journey but maintaining her characteristic calm. Recognition was a reflection of effort, not a reward in itself. Later, as recruits moved through routine drills, a subtle shift had taken hold. During a hand-to-hand combat session, a previously skeptical recruit asked for guidance, hesitant but genuine. She demonstrated a maneuver, explaining technique and timing with patience. The recruit's expression shifted from uncertainty to understanding, and a quiet bond of trust formed. His influence was growing, not through words, but through action and example. Leadership, she realized, was not about dominance or intimidation. It was about the quiet power of competence and reliability. Even Miller and Graham began to change. Their smirks faded, replaced with a guarded acknowledgement of her abilities. During a rifle drill, Miller hesitated, then muttered, "She's good." Didn't respond. She had learned long ago that the acknowledgement of others, while gratifying, was secondary to her own standards. Still, the change in dynamic was palpable. Respect was now earned, not demanded. The evening brought a rare moment of reflection. Sat alone on a grassy knoll overlooking the training grounds, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the long nights of training, the relentless drills, the whispered mockery, and the doubts she had silenced with action. Each challenge had forged a stronger, more capable version of herself. She realized that the army was more than physical endurance. It was a crucible for character, patience, and resilience. His mind wandered back to the earliest days at Fort Liberty, when she had been dismissed as weak and inexperienced. The contrast to her current standing was striking. She had transformed skepticism into proof, ridicule into respect, and isolation into dominance. The recruit who had once stumbled during initial drills now stood as an example of discipline, strategy, and courage. And yet she remained humble, knowing that every victory was built on preparation, observation, and relentless focus. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of simulations, missions, and strategies. Subconscious replayed scenarios she had already mastered, refining them, exploring alternative outcomes and envisioning future challenges. Even in rest, her mind remained sharp, always analyzing, always learning. This relentless pursuit of excellence had become second nature. She understood that true mastery required continual growth, adaptation, and reflection. The next morning brought another evaluation, this time focusing on group coordination under complex scenarios. Moved with precision, guiding less experienced recruits through tactical exercises while simultaneously monitoring the environment for errors or opportunities. Her leadership was quiet, authoritative without arrogance. Observed, nodding her ability to influence and inspire action without overt commands, a rare quality that distinguished exceptional soldiers from merely competent ones. By midweek, the shift in perception was complete. Recruits who had once whispered mockery now approached her with cautious respect, seeking advice, guidance, and mentorship. Responded with calm patience, offering insight without condescension. The transformation extended beyond her skills. She had become a model for what dedication, strategy, and resilience could achieve. Leadership, she realized, was as much about empowering others as it was about personal excellence. In one final exercise that week, a simulated ambush required coordination, observation, and split-second decision-making. Executed her role flawlessly, guiding her team while simultaneously neutralizing threats and maintaining situational awareness. The squad completed the mission efficiently, with minimal errors, and post-exercise assessment highlighted its influence as instrumental to the outcome. Her peers, now fully aware of her abilities, looked to her with admiration, trust, and a recognition of her leadership potential. As the week closed, took a moment to reflect quietly. Respect had been earned not through volume, ego, or bravado, but through action, preparation, and integrity. She understood that her journey was ongoing. Challenges would continue, and new obstacles would demand resilience, courage, and strategic thinking. Yet, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The recruit who had been dismissed, mocked, and underestimated had transformed herself into a soldier capable of earning trust, respect, and recognition through relentless focus and mastery of skill. That evening, as the sun set and shadows lengthened across Fort Liberty, gazed toward the horizon. The journey ahead would test her further, perhaps in ways she could not yet anticipate. Real combat would demand more than strategy, skill, and endurance. It would test courage, adaptability, and heart, but felt ready. She had learned that preparation, intelligence, and perseverance could turn the impossible into reality. She had earned respect, forged her identity, and transformed skepticism into undeniable proof of capability. And for the first time, understood the full weight of what it meant to be a soldier, not just in action, but in character, courage, and leadership. The label "just a recruit" was gone. In its place stood someone capable, resilient, and unstoppable, prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The final week at Fort Liberty brought with it the culmination of every lesson, every drill, and every challenge had endured. This was the moment every recruit dreaded. The ultimate evaluation, a full-scale, multi-scenario exercise designed to test physical endurance, mental acuity, and strategic thinking under extreme pressure. For it was also the stage upon which she would finally prove, beyond any shadow of doubt, that she was far more than just a recruit. The scenario was unlike anything the recruits had faced before. The battalion was divided into multiple units and deployed into a sprawling simulation zone, encompassing rugged hills, dense forests, and abandoned structures, all designed to replicate hostile territory. The objective was simple yet deadly in practice: navigate the terrain, neutralize a highly organized enemy force, extract hostages, and secure the area, all while remaining undetected as long as possible. The enemy squad was the most advanced group of instructors available, trained to adapt, anticipate, and react with ruthless efficiency. Addressed the recruits one last time before deployment, his tone steady but tinged with intensity. This is the final test. Success requires more than strength. It demands intelligence, adaptability, courage, and decisiveness. You will be challenged, you will be pushed to your limits, and you will face situations where failure is an option you cannot afford. Every lesson you've learned, every skill you've honed, will be put to the ultimate test. Listened intently, scanning the terrain in her mind. Her preparation over the past weeks had been meticulous. Observation, tactical drills, hand-to-hand combat, reconnaissance exercises, every moment now coalesced into readiness. She adjusted her gear, ensured her weapons were secure, and took a deep breath, centering herself. Unlike many recruits, anxiety did not dominate her thoughts. Focus did. Every scenario she had faced before was a rehearsal for this moment. The simulation began with chaos. Explosions, gunfire, and simulated threats erupted across the training grounds, creating an environment of confusion and urgency. Moved methodically, using cover, terrain, and her keen sense of observation to navigate the battlefield. Her peers often rushed or panicked, but she remained deliberate, assessing risks, calculating enemy movements, and identifying opportunities. Within moments, she had already neutralized 2 forward enemy scouts without being detected, her actions precise and silent. The first critical challenge came in the form of an ambush. Spotted a group of instructors moving in a tactical wedge formation, designed to trap and disorient her unit. She analyzed their positioning and movement patterns, identifying gaps in their coordination. Rather than reacting impulsively, she waited for the optimal moment, exploiting terrain for cover. Using quick, efficient maneuvers, she incapacitated the enemy scouts silently, creating confusion within the formation. By the time her squad realized the threat, had turned the ambush into an advantage. As the exercise progressed, the complexity increased. She encountered multiple enemy units, coordinated traps, and unpredictable variables, all designed to test improvisation and decision-making under pressure. Training, perseverance, and experience guided her through each scenario. She neutralized threats using minimal exposure, guided teammates without overt commands, and maintained situational awareness that allowed her to anticipate the enemy's strategy before it unfolded. The climax of the simulation involved a mock hostage extraction. A group of instructors had captured a civilian team member and fortified their position within a complex multi-level structure. Most recruits faltered, overwhelmed by the complexity, noise, and apparent danger. However, approached with a combination of tactical intelligence and confidence, she observed entry points, enemy patterns, and structural vulnerabilities. Timing, patience, and precision became her allies. Advanced stealthily, moving silently through shadows and corners. She neutralized guards one by one, exploiting their overconfidence and predictable routines. When she reached the hostage, she assessed the situation quickly. 2 armed instructors blocked the exit. Using a combination of feints, rapid maneuvers, and calculated timing, she incapacitated them with minimal risk, securing the hostages and creating a safe extraction route. Her movements were flawless, a seamless blend of strategy, skill, and decisiveness. By the time her squad at the extraction point had transformed what seemed like an impossible mission into a complete success. She had single-handedly neutralized multiple enemy units, extracted hostages, and secured critical objectives without significant support. The simulation, designed to push recruits to their limits, had become a showcase of her abilities, tactical brilliance, adaptability under pressure, and unyielding courage. Observed from a distance, his usual stoicism replaced by a rare glimmer of pride. He had trained countless soldiers, yet few had demonstrated the mastery exhibited in such high-pressure, dynamic situations. Even her peers, many of whom had doubted her from the beginning, watched in awe. Miller and Graham could hardly believe what they had witnessed. Once underestimated, had proven herself beyond question. The final debrief reinforced the magnitude of her achievement, highlighted her ability to integrate intelligence, strategy, and precision, emphasizing how her calm under pressure had been instrumental in mission success. He noted her leadership by example, guiding others silently yet effectively, and her capacity to adapt to changing scenarios with creativity and decisiveness. His journey from just a recruit to a formidable soldier was complete in the eyes of her instructors and peers alike. In the barracks that evening, the atmosphere had shifted completely. peers approached her with genuine respect, seeking guidance and expressing admiration. The previous hierarchy, based on physical strength or confidence, had been replaced with acknowledgement of skill, intelligence, and composure under pressure. Responded with quiet humility, offering insight without condescension, her actions reinforcing the lesson she had embodied throughout her training. Mastery speaks louder than words. Alone in her bunk later that night, reflected on her journey. Every insult, every moment of doubt, every challenge had been a building block for this moment. The mockery she had endured had become motivation. The skepticism of others had become fuel for preparation. She had transformed adversity into strength, isolation into advantage, and expectation into achievement. The label "just a recruit" no longer existed. She had earned recognition, respect, and most importantly, self-assurance. His mind wandered to the future. Real combat would be far more dangerous than simulations, with variables she could not anticipate. Yet the foundation she had built, discipline, observation, adaptability, courage, and strategic thinking, had prepared her for what lay ahead. She understood that the army demanded more than physical prowess. It demanded mental fortitude, emotional resilience, and a capacity to act decisively under extreme pressure. Was ready. The next morning, the final ceremony recognized exceptional performance across the battalion. Names were called, medals awarded, and accomplishments highlighted. When his voice rang out for her, there was a moment of stillness, as if the weight of her journey was collectively acknowledged. Stepped forward, her posture confident, her expression composed. She received recognition not as a novelty or anomaly, but as a testament to relentless effort, mastery, and unwavering focus. In the days that followed, story became part of Fort Liberty's lore. Recruits whispered about the young soldier who had turned mockery into motivation, isolation into advantage, and impossible scenarios into triumph. Her journey served as a blueprint for excellence. Preparation, intelligence, courage, and humility combined to overcome adversity. The lessons she had learned would guide her, and others, long after the training grounds faded from view. Once dismissed, mocked, and underestimated, had become a symbol of resilience and capability. The soldier who had been called just a recruit had taken control of her destiny, transforming challenges into victories and doubt into undeniable proof of strength. Her journey at Fort Liberty was complete, but her legacy, defined by courage, intelligence, and determination, had only begun. As the sun set over the training grounds one final time, stood alone on a ridge, looking out over the terrain she had conquered. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of her journey. She smiled quietly, knowing that she had earned far more than recognition. She had earned her identity as a soldier, forged through trials, determination, and unwavering resolve. The battles ahead would be difficult, unpredictable, and demanding, but was ready. And she would face them not as a recruit, but as a soldier of unmatched skill, courage, and integrity.